So you want to get started collecting data so that you can analyze it for your organization or your project. So you want to start with some data governance. What are some policies for your organization or your project to govern how information is collected, used, who has access, how is it stored? So let's take a look at data governance. So we'll start with how the data is collected. So you should have some policies or some procedures about how you're going to collect the information. And likely in your previous programs, you have done the TCPS2 if you're here in Canada, and that went through the ethics of research. And where you're doing your research or your data analysis, you might have a research ethics board as well. And so these are setting some standards, some policies on how data is collected. You might also have an industry code of conduct. So what you can see here on the right is the code of conduct for the European Pharmaceutical Marketing Research. Canada and the US are members of this, of EPHMRA. So if you are doing drug trials, any type of research related to sales of pharmaceuticals, then there is this code of conduct here. And the key, whether you're looking at TCPS2 or guidance from your research ethics board or your industry code of conduct, is that there needs to be informed consent. What my face is hiding on the slide is that it needs to be voluntary, anonymous, and confidential. So those are kind of the key foundations to any kind of data collection. Informed consent means we know what we're getting into. So if I'm participating in research, if I'm giving you my data, whether that is information that I'm giving to a business about what I buy and how often I buy, or whether that is me participating in a survey about mental health, or whether that is the doctor's office collecting information for medical research, there needs to be informed consent. The participant needs to know why I'm giving this information and what it's going to be used for. It needs to be voluntary, so it can't be coerced, and I get to choose whether or not I give the information. If at all possible, it needs to be anonymous. So you are disconnecting who I am with my information. So people don't know that the opinions I give, the information about my health are me. So it's made anonymous. And so we'll talk in just a moment about storage, about how you can protect that anonymity. Confidential, so things that are said can't be tracked back to me. If I'm providing in a focus group my feedback, then it's a general summary of the feedback, not Stephanie said this. And same thing with medical health, that I can't be identified in the data. So informed consent, voluntary, anonymous, confidential. And the other thing you will find when it comes to marketing research is that any type of research collection by a company that sells things or fundraises, they need to be separated. So we keep separate any form of promotion or selling. So we have the term sugging. Sugging is selling under the guise of research. This would be my company is trying to collect information about customers. We do a survey about customers' interests, what they like about our product, but we're really just using it to promote and get them to buy our stuff, as opposed to collecting the information to make business decisions for our organization. So yes, an organization can both sell and collect data and do research, but there needs to be a clear separation. So there's not this perception of those who are participating in the research that you're simply just doing the research to get me to buy things. In terms of code of conduct and how data is collected, we also want no frugging. So frugging is fundraising under the guise of research. So you might be an organization that, let's say that you're breast cancer awareness, and your organization, right, does fundraising to help in terms of breast cancer research. You can collect data and do research to collect information on people and analyze it, it, but in your communication with the participants, there should not also be a, hey, give us money. They need to be separate in your operations. So we're separating out the fundraising and the research so that they are happening separately, so people don't perceive that your research is just a guise, a ruse, to get money to fundraise. Okay. Now, in terms of that collecting process and we're looking at our data governance, we should have data governance that addresses various different aspects. These are the 10 principles for the marketing research a body. They have since joined forces with another entity, and we'll look at their more complicated list in a moment. But the marketing research intelligence, here it says, okay, we need to make sure that there is consent so people can opt not to have their data collected. There needs to be public confidence. So if you're asking questions in a survey, in an interview, if this is information that's being collected for any type of research, then we need to create confidence in research. So they're professional questions, they're not biased in their wording, the behavior of the researcher is professional, to ensure that there is confidence when people give their data. We talked about anonymity before. As we talk about a public's right to privacy, we want to make sure that any data we're collecting, whether this is a survey or focus group, or whether this is our company collecting information. So for example, if you're Red Deer Polytechnic and we're collecting information from our students and people who are enrolled, are we ensuring that the information we're collecting for our database is only the information that we need? So any other questions, any other information that's not needed for operations or for research, we should not be collecting. And so this comes down to, as you are looking at collecting information, what actual decisions can you make based on the information? If we're looking at human resources, for example, we might want to do a survey of our employees and ask them all kinds of questions. But if we ask them questions, there becomes an expectation that they will act on this information. If you're asking me my opinion about the organization's mission and strategy, I expect you're going to listen to that feedback and it's going to impact the organization's strategy. If it's not going to change anything, if no decisions can be made because the people asking don't have the authority, or there was never an intention to actually act on the information, then the code of conduct says we should not be asking those questions at all. You want to create confidence in the research and data collection, and you want to protect people's right to privacy by not asking them for additional personal information that is not going to be able, that the organization isn't going to be able to do anything with. We want to make sure we have accuracy. So that is why you're here, so that when you analyze data, you're using the appropriate analytics tools, and that and then you've probably taken some training already in terms of research questions, how to draft them. You can also see in my book some guidance on creating survey questions, organizing focus groups, to help you in that data collection, to make sure that the methods you're using to collect the information and the wording in your questions are appropriate, that you can act on them. We want to make sure questions and behavior of researchers are respectful, that we protect confidentiality and data privacy. In just a moment, we're going to look at storage. So a lot of the data privacy is related to that. The other part of data privacy is not asking questions that you don't need the information for. Make sure you follow all relevant laws, and we'll look at some of the laws that are relevant to data governance in just a second. Make sure that you are knowledgeable in the appropriate design, execution, and analysis of research. You should be familiar with in terms of the industry code of conduct. Here we're looking at the marketing research one. And so there's an expectation that you're familiar with your field, your discipline's expectations in terms of data collection and the appropriate code of conduct. So the marketing research one has a last one here, which is professionalism, to continuously improve yourself in your profession. If we go here, let me just go to CRIC. So the Canadian Research Insights Council is what has since merged with Marketing Research Institute. Okay. And so I'm just going to go into the table of contents. So you can see how they've expanded on the 10 principles to get a little bit more specific. And so for simplicity, I just went through the 10 from the old organization, but you can see here now those principles have been expanded to many more as we're looking at uses of secondary data, which we'll talk about in a later video, as well as particular responsibilities with children, young people, vulnerable populations, how to publish. And so you can see a number of them that were in the previous one are still here, focusing on implementation of your project. And so they've expanded the list in their new form as they've merged with CRIC. Let's go back to our slides. All right, so we first said data governance should be policies on how you collect that are consistent with TCPS2, with Research Ethics Board, with your industry code of conduct. The other thing we look at with data governance is storage. How is the information you are collecting, how is it stored? So we want to know, is it private? Who has access to this data? That is not only protecting from external access, but also within the organization itself. So there has been issues, for example, where information is stored in the cloud and people, because there weren't the proper infrastructure on the website, when people went in to get information about themselves, they were actually able to see everybody else's data as well. So that's an issue. So we have to look at how is the data stored and who has access. So if you're able to log in to a website to get information about your own data that's being collected, whether this is my account information or my usage, my previous purchases for Amazon, that is all data. And there's data governance and policies in terms of who has access to that. Who has access within the organization? So if you think about, for example, healthcare or education, who should be able to see all the records of the individuals, the students, or the patient? As an instructor, should I be able to see the students' performance in all of their other courses? Or should that be protected and I only see the information related to the student in my class? Should I be able to go in and see their personal home address, their phone number? And so then we look at protecting the privacy of the individual, that only the people who need access have access, and only the information that they need, that they can actually action, make decisions, do things with, is the only information that they have access to. So there are regulatory compliances in terms of laws and regulations as to what you can have access to. And we need to think about we'll look in just a second at those laws, but when it comes to storage, what we want is de-identification. So if possible, we want to store information separately. We'll have a common key, some kind of number or code that connects the two data sets, but we want to separate, for example, the list of people who are involved in our surveys about mental health and their opinions, thoughts, diagnoses related to mental health. So we store them separately so that if you came across just the data set of people's feelings, diagnoses, you don't know who that is. And if you come across the data set that is the participants in the survey, you don't know what their diagnosis was, how they're feeling, how they responded. So we de-identify, remove the names of participants if we can. And if we need to keep them, then we store them separately. We also need to make sure, what my face is hiding here, is that there is destruction of those identifications. So for example, if we do a focus group and we record, or we do an interview and we record, if that's converted into a transcript and the transcript is verified or signed off by the participant, yes, that's what I said, You destroy the recording so that you don't have that identifier, that person in the video or the person in audio, that then the information they provide can be tracked to them. So we're trying to de-identify by destroying the original recording once we've transcribed, separating out the participants from their feedback, or removing the names of participants from the list. So the problem is when you have all of this stuff together, then there can be a data breach. For example, in 2014, Marriott had a data breach, so hackers got access to their database. It wasn't discovered until 2018, so they had a long time to have access to 500 million records. And what you have in these records is people's names, their addresses, their phone numbers, their email, their passport, their birth date, their gender. All of these things combined make it possible for identity fraud, right? Because these are all the identifications. When they're trying to figure out if you are who you say you are, right? Your passport shows that you are that name, or your birth date identifies that you are that name. And so all of these combined together is what puts people at risk. So when we store things, we need to de-identify, we need to separate out the information so that if anything is compromised, it doesn't create much bigger issues because it's all together. When we look at storage for data governance, we're also going to need to make sure we have common data definitions and formats so that we can pull the information that needs to be combined back together. And so we'll have a separate video talking about a data dictionary. How do you create common data definitions so that you can pull information, analyze it, and use it? But let's look here before we leave this slide at some of the regulatory compliance. And so there are different laws related to how data is stored. In Alberta, we have the Health Information Act that's specifically for how health data is stored and who has access. In the US, they have what is called HIPAA. So different provinces, states, countries will have different laws regarding. So there are laws related to health. The second one that my face is covering is specific to children. So in the US, they have COPPA, which is the Children Online Privacy Protection Act. Canada does not currently, as of the making of this video, have one specific to children's data. But where you're operating, you may have one specific to children as well. The third thing my face is covering is financial laws that govern how you can store data related to people's finances. So they would govern banks, lending offices. What kind of information can you have about my credit and about how much money I have, how much debt I have? In Canada, there's the Bank Act. In the US, there is the GLBA, which is the Gramm-Leach. Can never remember. All right. Great source to see a list here. There's an article in Forbes. I'll put a link that has some of the US data privacy protection laws kind of summarized. So I'm just going to quick scroll. You can see HIPAA there. Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act is the one that's specific to financial institutions in the US. As we're talking about data sites, here's another one. This is the summary of the privacy laws in Canada. And so we can see here, Privacy Act, PIPEDA. So in Canada, we have Personal Information Protection and Electronics Documents Act. PIPEDA is for businesses. So in terms of like Marriott, what kind of information then can they collect? How do they store it? And so we have regulatory compliance for-profit commercial activities in Canada. In the US, they are state by state, the ones that are regarding how businesses collect data. And so California, for example, has the CCPA. So it's important to understand as you build your data governance policy and decide how your data is going to be stored, what are the regulatory compliances for your particular area and for your particular discipline, whether it's health, whether it's finance, business, whether your research involves children, and so on. So then the third part for data governance is going to be how we dispose of the data. And the key here as we look at industry code of conducts is that any data, any personal data cannot be kept beyond the time required to fulfill the purpose of the study. So we always come back to why was the information collected? What is it going to be used for? And so we need to destroy that data when we have used it for its purpose. So policies on how long records are held as paper, electronically, who's going to be responsible for the disposal. We tend to think about disposal when we're doing research projects. We collect surveys, focus groups, that type of thing. When we talk about disposal, we also need to think about our data in general. So if we're collecting information, health data, we're collecting information as Red Deer Polytechnic on students. If you're the Alberta government and you've collected documents that are proposed plans that are feedback from the community, all of this needs a data governance policy. So all text is data, not just surveys and focus groups, not just forms, but all text is also data. So how long do you keep it? What you can see here on the right is that any documents that are related to planning goals and objectives in the Alberta government are destroyed after 10 years. Any copies are destroyed after 1. So when we look at our data governance policy, we need to consider all data, and we'll have a video on all the different types of data, but you should have a plan for how long you're going to keep them, whether they're paper, whether they're electronic, and so on. And this is regardless of whether this is customer complaints, whether this is information about your clients, how long are you keeping that information? So just to wrap us up, data governance, we are looking at policies on how the information is collected, how the information is stored, how the information is disposed of. And really it comes down to making sure that we uphold the ethics of research and data collection and protect the privacy and the rights of the people's information that we are collecting.